Hey, Motorman here. I've got a quick tip this week. I hear so much about this high center of gravity stuff that I felt the need to talk about this. Now, take a look at these two motorcycles. We got a Harley Davidson Road King. We got the Low Rider over here. Which one do you think has the higher center of gravity? Well, it doesn't matter. Every motorcycle has a high center of gravity, meaning if I took these bikes right now off the kickstand and held it off straight and let go, they'd fall down. That'll happen on either one of these bikes, and they will fall at the exact same speed. If I took a bicycle, just a normal 10-speed bicycle, take it off the kickstand, let go of it, it's falling down, and it'll fall at the same pace as either one of these will. That's just science. That's really what it is. And I'm going to get on the bike. I'm going to go for a ride. We're going to talk a little bit more about this. I'm going to explain to you exactly why the center of gravity of your motorcycle means absolutely nothing. All right, let's go for a ride. All right, so center of gravity. I see so much stuff on the internet about this. Usually it's about people saying this bike has a high center of gravity, that one, I especially hear it from people about Sportsters. They say a Sportster has a very high center of gravity. Well, that's total bull. I'll tell you what a bike that has a high center of gravity, that would be an adventure tourer like the BMW 1200. That's a high center of gravity. You got, I think it's an 8-gallon tank, and the bike sits up, I think seat height is like 34 or 35 inches. That would be a higher center of gravity. Now the question is then, does it mean anything? And why would people that have a Sportster, which has like a 24-inch seat height, think that that bike has a high center of gravity? Well, let me tell you why. Usually Sportsters are purchased by, I think mainly women, and usually it's their first bike, and they went from the beginner's course, and then they bought a Sportster, which is, there's a lot of choices in beginner bikes. I don't really consider the Sportster a beginner bike, but it's good in that it's fairly light and very maneuverable. But these women who came out of the beginner course and they've yet to master the clutch and throttle, they get on a Sportster which probably weighs 200 pounds more than the bike they were learning on, and the bike feels like it wants to fall over. And they find it very difficult that once it falls past a certain point, they can't hold it up. They got to drop it. Yeah, that's very typical. And the reason that that's happening is because, again, you haven't mastered the friction zone. That is so important. I can't stress it enough. And I'm going to stop here and show you this. This is not brain surgery, folks. By the way, I'm going to take off my left fingerless glove. I wear the fingerless gloves for two reasons. One, and probably the main reason, is some way it pisses off the motorcycle safety PC police. They hate that I wear that, but I wear it because there's tiny little buttons on this camera, and in order to press them, I need to be able to feel it. In addition, here I'm going to take this glove off. Yes, I'm going to risk my life taking it off so that you could better see exactly what my hand is doing. Now, granted, this is not going to help you very much, this camera view that you see right here, but people think it does. The reason I don't think it helps you very much is because my clutch is not going to grab the exact same spot yours is. But I'm going to show you that view anyway because people seem to like it whenever I show that. So we're going to put the bike in gear, and I'm going to demonstrate the friction zone. Now, I'm going to feed a little bit of throttle. That's 1200 RPM or so, and I start to let the clutch out. The bike starts to creep forward. I've entered the friction zone. I'm not very far into it because I'm actually holding the bike back with my feet. If I put my feet up, the bike's going to start to move. That friction zone is about 1 inch wide on most motorcycles. I know a lot of people think it's they say, well, my bike is like an on and off switch. Not really. Every time somebody's come to my class and said, there's something wrong with my clutch, it has no friction zone. It's either on or it's off. And I get on their bike and I do all the maneuvers and I say, no, it's not the motorcycle. It's probably the nut behind the handlebars is loose. You got to tighten it up. Meaning the person riding the bike. It ain't the bike. So we're going to let this clutch out just a little bit. We're going to feed a little throttle. And all I'm doing now is I'm staying in the friction zone. I'm not letting it out all the way. How hard is that? In other words, you have to pass through the friction zone every time you take off from a stop by feeding a little gas and letting the clutch out. You don't just pop that clutch out. If you did, you'd have one hell of a ride. I mean, you'd be popping the clutch out, maybe bringing the front wheels up. It'd be an awful thing. So everybody knows that in order to get the bike moving, you have to slip the clutch a bit. So all I'm telling you, at low speeds, when you want to make low speed turns, stay in that friction zone. It also is helpful to put a little pressure on the rear brake. Watch, we'll do it right now. Not brain surgery. That little bit of pressure on the rear brake, it helps to stabilize the bike. When you get really good at coordinating the clutch and throttle, you won't need to use the brake when practicing. But when you're making a U-turn out on the street, I always advise go ahead and use that rear brake to be just a little bit safer, make things easier for you. So we're going to coordinate the clutch and throttle. We can almost bring the bike to a stop without putting the feet down. A little bit of brake. To practice this and get good at this, using the friction zone while going straight shouldn't take you more than 15 minutes. I've also showed other things in my Ride Like a Pro video. I show you several ways of getting a good handle of exactly where that friction zone is. You can even let the clutch out a little bit, start getting into the friction zone, and duck walk the bike. And yeah, you shouldn't have people seeing you do this because it makes you look like a doofus, but at least you'll know that if you duck walk the bike, you shouldn't be ready to fall over because the bike is dead straight up and I'm duck walking it. We're going probably 3-4 miles an hour, but eventually you get over the fear that the bike is going to fall over. As long as you keep that power going to the rear wheel with the clutch and throttle, and you pick up your feet. Right now I got my feet up. I'm not using any brake at all. I'm going 3 miles an hour. Everybody who rides a motorcycle should be able to do this. You never want to hit the front brake when making tight low speed turns because the bike will fall over really fast. So fast you won't know what hit you. Now I know, and I get this question a lot, and I probably mentioned it in my Ride Like a Pro video a dozen times. People say, yeah, but I got linked brakes. What happens then? I know that if I press on the rear brake, it also gives me front brake. Isn't that going to make me fall? Isn't that why I've been falling down all the time? No, that's not why. It's if you're pressing so hard on the rear brake that it's actually pulling down that front wheel, you're pressing way too hard. It's very light pressure. I can't tell you how much pressure because you don't have a pressure gauge on your foot. So if I said it was 2.5 pounds of pressure, how would you know when you got to 2.5 pounds? It's just something you got to figure out through repetition. If you're having a real hard time with that, figuring out the friction zone, notice right ahead here we have a curb. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my front tire against this curb, and I also show this and as well as other things on the Ride Like a Pro video. I'm going to get my front tire right up against it. Now I'm going to let the clutch out a little bit. I'm going to feed a little throttle, but I'm not going to let it climb up onto that curb. If I let the clutch out too far and give it too much gas, yeah, it's possible it could climb right up there, but that's not what you want to do. You want to get it to where you could feel the curb is holding you back. Maybe do this for the count of 3 or 4. Stop, let the bike, the clutch cool down for 3 or 4 seconds, but do this until you could do this every time up against a curve without the motorcycle stalling. If the bike stalls, yeah, you don't have a good handle on it. So don't do that. It takes maybe 10 minutes of practice doing that you should be able to. And once you get this down, man, you could take off from a stop, full lock, dip right into that U-turn. Nothing to it. But you got to have confidence in your ability to use that friction zone. It is the key to everything. Once you do that, it doesn't matter how high the bike is. If you ever watch the police rodeo, they're sitting on Harley Davidsons with the police seat, which it sits about 6 inches above the frame. And you got the rider, especially if a guy's 6'4" and weighs 250 pounds, all the center of gravity is way up there, but yet they're handling the bike like a toy. Why? Because they know how to use this friction zone and the rear brake. It is so important. It makes things so much easier when you could do that confidently. Turn that motorcycle. There's nothing to it when you use clutch, throttle, a little bit of rear brake, and of course, most important, your head and eyes. I want to make this turn in 18 feet here. I just turn the bars, turn my head, and around comes the motorcycle. If I put a little dip in there to start that turn, it makes it easier, but I can do it just by pulling straight on in there, turning my head and eyes. and less than 18 feet, the bike will make this turn every time. So center of gravity means nothing. I'm going to show you a clip with at our class we had a guy with an adventure tour. I think it's 1250 or 1250 cc, like I said, 8 or 9 gallon gas tank. The bike sits 34 inches above the ground, yet the guy is doing fantastic on the bike. Why? Because he doesn't care about the center of gravity. Who cares where it is if you know how to use that clutch and throttle? And it just takes, I mean, put in a half hour doing this stuff just in a straight line. And I have to tell you, before I ever went to motor school, I figured out that if you slip the clutch a bit, slipping meaning use the friction zone, put a little pressure on the rear brake, you could turn that motorcycle, make a U-turn no problem. What I didn't figure out was that if I turned my head and eyes, I could let that bike lean over until you hear that scraping sound. I didn't know that. They taught me that in motor school, but I had figured out that if you want good control of the motorcycle at low speeds, you got to use the friction zone. Once you let the clutch out all the way, it's out all the way right now. If I give it a little throttle, look what happens. Now, if I'm trying to turn and do that, it's going to make the bike go straight, and I could smash into these cars over here. So I want to use the friction zone so that I'm in complete, total control of the motorcycle. So in closing, center of gravity means absolutely nothing unless you're a complete doofus with the clutch and throttle or a complete beginner. But I know guys that have been riding for many years and still haven't figured out what that friction zone does for them. I know because they come to my class all the time, and I'm amazed. I've even get truck drivers that come to my class, and I say to them, you know, when you're backing up your 18-wheeler, do you pop the clutch out all the way and just hit the gas? And they say no. I said, well, what do you do? They said, well, you have to, you know, you slip the clutch. I said, exactly. If you could slip the clutch with your feet, I guarantee you got more dexterity in your hands than you do in your feet. And pretty soon they get the idea of it. We always start our classes, and by the way, we've got classes all over the country. If you go to my website, ridelikeapro.com, click on training locations, we'll show you all our classes. We got 22 of them around the country. We're about to get one in California as well, probably within the next month or so. If you want a class with me here in Newport Richey, Florida, you click on Classes with Motorman. But in the class, the first thing we do is start with the slow race, because we want to make sure that people have at least an idea of how to use that friction zone, the clutch, the throttle, and the rear brake. When going straight, you hardly need any pressure at all on the rear brake. But when you start making turns, you need a bit more pressure. As I said, I can't tell you exactly how much pressure, because you don't have a pressure gauge on your foot, so it wouldn't matter. It's something you have to do, work through repetition and a little bit of practice. When I say practice, I'm saying you should have the slow race down in a straight line in 20 minutes, 30 minutes at the most. If you absolutely can't get it, well, there's a clutch called a recluse clutch, which allows you to keep the clutch completely out and give it a little gas, and then just use a little bit of throttle against the rear brake, and you don't have to worry about coordinating the clutch. If you have an automatic transmission, as people are always asking me about this, what about the new DCT clutch? Well, or transmission, you don't have a clutch. What are you going to do? It'd be impossible then, right? No. All you got to do is coordinate the throttle against the rear brake. I've seen some guys with DCT transmissions who are really doing some wonderful maneuvers with a gull wing with the DCT, 18-foot turns and all. The fact is, though, especially the guy I've been watching on YouTube doing that, he was very good with the clutch and throttle to begin with. He was making 18-foot turns with the clutch and throttle wing, and then he got the DCT, and he said it took him a few hours to get the hang of it, but and I think it's a little more difficult to find that sweet spot between enough pressure on the rear brake and enough throttle on a gull wing, and you probably want to use the rain mode because it makes the throttle less sensitive, but it can be done. So if you like these videos I keep putting out for you, I hope you learned something by them. I hope you subscribe. Give me a thumbs up. And until next time, keep the shiny side up.